There is something coming that is going to be astronomical, not only in this country, but in the world. And I wonder, are you ready? We're going to talk about it in today's video. What's going on, everybody? Jeremy here. And if you want to follow along on my journey of how I try to build wealth, then subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you don't miss a thing. Unless you've been under a rock somewhere for the last year, then you know exactly what's happening across the globe in every country, including the United States. And one of the things that the US has been doing that some other countries have not been doing is printing money at an astronomical rate. This is a chart that shows the amount of printing and money in circulation, and I want you to see something right here. Basically, the estimates are that in 2020, the federal government has printed 20 to 30% of all of the currency that has ever been printed in the history of the United States. Think about that. The United States has printed 20 to 30% of all of the currency that has ever been printed, injecting it in stimulus payments and who knows what else, just trying to stimulate the economy. This economy is broken. It is dead. The only reason that it hasn't crashed worse than the Great Depression is because the government keeps injecting money, trying to stimulate it. If you remember back in, I think it was 2018, the Fed raised interest rates just like a tiny little bit, and it almost crashed the system because essentially everything is broken. People here in the United States don't know how to save. I hope that you're not one of those, but we are in debt up to our eyeballs as a nation, and personally on an individual citizen level, people essentially, whatever they make, they dump it into payments, and they have no savings. I think the statistic is that something like 60% of Americans have less than $400 in savings, which is crazy to think about. And so what did the government do over 2020? They just started pumping money into the economy with stimulus checks. I think by the time this last stimulus goes out, the average American household will have gotten $12,000 to $15,000 from the government. So you think, okay, well, what will that do? It should stimulate the economy, right? People are going to be spending that money. They're going to be going out to eat. They're going to be buying new things. It hasn't been happening. Obviously, restaurants have been shut down. They're also, in general, by and large, not making big purchases. Instead, what they seem to be doing is saving money. I have a friend who works for, he's pretty high up in a smaller banking system. They have about 50 branches. And in their system alone, they have seen the savings rate go up $250 million. And that was before this last stimulus check. So people essentially aren't spending that money. They're just sticking it in the bank, or they're buying stocks with it. You see the stock market rising. That's all an inflated bubble because of all this money that's being injected. It's not actually being spent in the economy to sort of keep the economy going. It's just been basically invested and put in savings. And so it's actually not doing anything. Instead, what it's doing is building the supply of currency that is sort of there. Think of it like a bubble. It's just sitting there waiting for something to trigger to be spent. And you're starting to notice in lumber, I don't know if you're in the building trades at all, if you ever go to Lowe's or Home Depot and look at the cost of lumber. It has been rising steadily. I looked just the other day, I was at Lowe's, and I've been sort of following this. One 2x4 8-foot piece of lumber is almost $10 here in Florida. That's crazy. That's at least double what it was a year and a half ago. Even just the non-pressure treated 2x4 is about $6 or $7, and you could get those for $250 all day long last year. And so you're starting to see inflation popping its head up in different industries. Lumber and building supplies, one of them. The other place that people aren't really thinking about, but it's being inflated, is the housing market. The price of housing, now obviously if you're in some of these highly restricted areas of the country. This isn't happening because people are fleeing from those areas. California, New York, people are moving out in droves because of the high taxes and everything else that's happening in those states. But the areas of the country where there are more freedoms and more liberty, the price of houses are going through the roof. In our area right now, you could list your house and have a contract on it in one day. And likely it'll be 10 to 20% higher than what you put it on the market for. There's just that many people who are trying to buy homes in this area. And they've got all this money from stimulus dollars that are flowing into it. And so the question then becomes, what's going to happen? And the reality is there is no way to avoid the fact that we will have hyperinflation at some point. Likely in the next few years, I would guess, maybe even less than that. Because what's happening is all of these people are stockpiling money. They're either stockpiling money in their bank accounts, or they're taking that money and they're putting it into stocks, or they're taking that money and they're putting it into Bitcoin or other altcoins. And what's happening is the economy is not being stimulated at all. And the value of your dollar is dramatically going down. So there's no real benefit for you to put it in savings, because eventually those, let's say that you had $5,000 in savings, that $5,000 at the current rates that this government is printing money is only going to be worth half of that in a year or two. So you might have $5,000, but it's only going to be worth $2,000 or even less, depending on what happens. And so hyperinflation is going to happen when people who have been stockpiling this money or paying off debt, paying off debt doesn't stimulate the economy. It just takes that money off the books for these banks, and they've got cash in their bank that they've got to try to loan out again. But what will happen is people will begin to see that the value of their dollar is dramatically going down. And once they realize that the value of their dollar sitting in a bank account somewhere is not worth much of anything, they're going to say, okay, I need to do something, because saving all this money is not going to do me any good. And so what's going to happen is they're going to start spending that money. You can already see it on groceries. I don't know. Our family, we used to be able to live off of about $400 in groceries. We've seen that go up to about $600 in the last year, just because of the cost of groceries going up. We're seeing it in groceries. We're seeing it in building materials. And you'll start seeing inflation start popping up in different areas. And once it really starts to go, gas, now part of that is policies as far as why price of fuel has gone up, but part of that is inflation. And what's going to happen is when people start to realize that the purchasing power of their dollars is dropping, they're going to start pulling that money out of the banks and start buying up the things that they think they're going to need. And then their neighbor's going to realize the same thing, and they're going to start buying up things. And now the whole city, it's going to spread to the state, to the country, and now you've got trillions and trillions of dollars. Go back to this graph. Look at this. Look at the amount of currency that has ever been printed in the history of this country. Has basically been injected into the system, but it's just sitting there, sitting in banks, sitting in stock market, sitting in real estate, sitting in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And what's going to happen is all these people are going to say, oh, it's just sitting there and it's losing value. I'm going to start spending it on whatever, silver, on gold, on whatever. And all of a sudden, all of this currency is just going to flood into the system. And once that happens, you're going to see prices across the board just go through the roof. Hyperinflation. You look at what has happened in Venezuela and some of these other countries that have printed astronomical amounts of currency. Zimbabwe, you look at Zimbabwe, it costs $1 trillion for a gallon of milk, which is unheard of. But there is no way out of this except to inflate. And essentially, that's what this government is going to do. They're going to continue to inflate the economy. They're going to continue to print money. And they're essentially going to use that printed money that's not worth anything to pay off all of their debts. Because if they keep printing money, then the value of their debt is going to drop, because they're basically paying back all of their debts to other nations with dollars that they printed out of thin air. that aren't worth hardly anything. And ultimately, I believe that there will be a reset coming. And probably the dollar as we know it will go away, and something new will pop out. Now, I've got some theories on that, and I will be making some more videos on all of that. But I say all of this to say that inflation at levels that we have never seen, at least in my generation, are coming. And I wholeheartely believe that we're going to have a depression way worse than what was seen in the 1920s and early 30s. It's going to come, and it's going to come fast. And the question is, are you ready? What are you doing to prepare for the coming inflation that's about to rear its ugly head? And so I hope that you're doing something to get ready and prepare. If you like this video, please like it, subscribe, share it with somebody that needs to hear this, and I'll see you on the next one.